The stallion put Cole Mercer's best rider into the rails on a Tuesday morning, and the new hire stood at the fence with her bedroll still over her shoulder and watched it happen and did not flinch, which was the first thing anyone noticed about her, that she did not flinch. The horse was a big blood bay with 3 years of meanness bred into him by handling and one white-rimmed eye that found you across a corral and held you, and he had just thrown a man named Pike clean over his shoulder into the cedar posts, and Pike was getting up slow with his arm held wrong. "That horse will kill somebody before the summer is out," the foreman said to no one, which was his way. "He will if you keep at him like that," the woman said. "Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel." The foreman turned and looked at her, then for the first time. A big woman, broad through the shoulder and wide through the hip, in a man's canvas trousers and a faded shirt gone soft with washing, a plain, weathered face under a flat-brimmed hat, and a way of standing still that most people only manage when they are asleep. Her name was Ruth Ackley. She'd come up from the Southern outfits on the word of a letter, hired to cook and to mend and to keep the bunkhouse books, and nobody had said one thing to her about horses, and she had not asked. "You the new cook?" the foreman said. "I am." "Then the corral is not your business," he said, not unkind, only tired, and he turned back to where 2 hands were trying to crowd the bay into a chute with ropes and poles, and the bay went up wide-eyed and screaming and came down on the rails again, and the whole pen shook with it, and Ruth Ackley watched a moment longer, then shouldered her bedroll and went to find the kitchen. The ranch was called the Bench. 4 sections of grass and cedar break against the foot of a long, dry mesa, and Cole Mercer ran it for an owner back east who he had never met and corresponded with twice a year. He was a man of about 36, lean and burned dark, a horseman's hands gone scarred at the knuckles, a quiet that the hands took for hardness, and that was mostly only grief held still. He had bought the blood bay 3 years back off a broke-down breeder, sight half seen, on the strength of the animal's blood and his own certainty that there was no horse he could not bring around, and the bay had taught him different in front of everyone he employed, which is a hard way for a proud man to learn a thing. Ruth cooked. She was good at it, which surprised them, and the food came hot and plenty and on time, and within a week the grumbling at the table had turned to something near to courting, the hands competing in small ways for a second helping or a word from her, and she gave the helpings freely and the words sparingly and kept her own counsel. She rose before the cook fire wanted lighting, and she walked, every morning, out past the kitchen and the smokehouse to the far pen at the edge of the cedar where they kept the bay alone, because he could not be kept with other stock, and she stood at the rails in the gray light with a cup of coffee, and did not say anything to the horse, and did not reach for him, and did not climb up on the fence to look bigger than she was. She stood. After a while, she drank her coffee and went back and made the breakfast. She did that 11 mornings before Cole Mercer caught her at it. He came around the smokehouse in the half-dark looking for a lost hound, and found his cook standing at the killer's fence with her coffee. The both of them, the woman and the horse, doing nothing at all, just 20 feet of dust between them and the gray light coming up behind the mesa. "He has put 4 men in the dirt," Mercer said, "one of them twice." "I know it," said Ruth. "I watched." "Then you know to stay off that fence." "I am not on the fence," she said. "I am beside it." And she did not look at him when she said it. She kept her eyes on the bay, who had lifted his head at the man's voice and laid his ears and shown the white of his eye, and she let the quiet come back down over the pen, and after a moment the bay dropped his head again and went back to pulling at the thin hay, and Mercer stood and watched the horse do a thing the horse had not done in his presence in 3 years, which was to stop minding that a person was there. He did not say anything else. He found his hound and went, and Ruth finished her coffee and made the breakfast, and that might have been the whole of it, except that he came back the next morning to see if he had imagined it. He had not. She was there in the gray with her cup, and the bay stood hip-shot and easy not 15 feet off, dozing, one ear loose, and when Mercer's boot turned to stone, the horse came up tense again, and Ruth said, low, not to the man, "There now, it is only him," and the horse blew out and settled, and Mercer felt the words go into him sideways the way a thing does when it is not meant for you, but you catch it anyway. "That is the closest he has been to easy since I have owned him," he said. "He has decided I am furniture," said Ruth. "A person can get a great deal done being furniture. People tell furniture the truth and they spook a man who is trying too hard. And a horse is only a person with bigger reasons to run." It was the longest string of words he had heard out of her, and he turned it over the rest of the day and did not get to the bottom of it. The hands had their own account of her, and it was not all kind. There was a young rider named Dewey, 19 and proud of the little he knew, who had been thrown by the bay twice and had it in for the animal the way a boy has it in for a thing that has shamed him, and he did not like that the new cook walked out to the killer's pen every morning and made the rest of them look like they had been going about it wrong for 3 years. "She is sweet on a horse, because no man will have her," Dewey said at the table, loud, the way a boy says a cruel thing he has rehearsed, and the table went quiet, and Ruth set the coffee pot down at the near end and looked at him down the length of the boards. "That is a true thing you have said," she answered. "Level, no heat in it. No man will have me, and I have made my peace with it a good while back, which is more than you have made with being thrown by a horse that outweighs you 8-1. Eat your supper." And she went back to the stove, and a couple of the older hands laughed low into their plates, and Dewey went red and said nothing. And the thing about Ruth Ackley that the table learned that night was that she would not be made small by a thing said out loud, having grown all the way around it years ago the way a tree grows around a nail. She kept walking out to the pen. The bay kept letting her. By the 3rd week she had moved, without seeming to move, from the rails to just inside the gate, sitting on an upturned bucket in the corner of the pen with her mending in her lap, her back half to the horse, doing her work and humming low under her breath and paying him no mind at all, and the bay stood at the far side and watched her and did not come and did not leave, and that was where it stood, the two of them in the pen together with 20 feet of dust between them, for the better part of a week. The bucket is the thing that moved over those days. She set it a little nearer the center each morning, never closer to him, only less far, the way you let a shy thing think the meeting was its own idea, and she never once reached out. And the bay, who had been taught by the rope and the pole and the crowding chute that a person coming near meant a fight, was learning the slow, strange new lesson that a person could be near and want nothing. And that is a harder thing to teach a horse than to teach a man, because a man can be told, and a horse can only be shown. Mercer took to coming out in the mornings. He stood outside the rails where he would not crowd the thing, and he watched his cook sit in the dust with her mending, and he learned more about gentling a horse in those gray half-hours than he had learned in 20 years of breaking them, though it galled him to learn it, and he did not let on that it galled him, and she did not let on that she knew it did. "Where did you learn it?" he asked her one morning. "My father," she said, threading a needle without looking up. "He gentled horses for the army remount and the big outfits, the bad ones, the spoiled ones nobody else would touch. He was a small, quiet man, and he never raised his voice to a horse or a child in his life, and he taught me that you cannot make a frightened thing trust you." She bit the thread. You can only become a thing it is not afraid of, and then wait. The waiting is the whole of the work. Most people cannot do the waiting. They want the horse today. "You are not in a hurry," he said. "I've got nowhere I would rather be than a quiet pen in the morning," she said. "That is not patience. That is just the truth of my life." And she said it plainly, with no pity in it for herself, and Mercer looked at the side of her plain-weathered face and felt something he had not let himself feel in the 4 years since he had buried his wife, and he put it down hard and did not name it, and went to see to the day. The cookhouse warmed to her by degrees, the way a cold room warms from the stove out. She kept the bunkhouse books in a careful hand and caught 2 errors in the feed account that had been bleeding the outfit a little every month for a year, and she set old Esau's bad knee with a wrap and a liniment she cooked up off the back of the stove, and had him walking sound inside a week, and she sewed a torn pay shirt for the youngest hand, without being asked, and left it folded on his bunk with no word about it. And one by one the men came to treat her not as a curiosity, and not as a woman to court, but as the fixed point a good cookhouse turns on, which is a kind of respect that is slow to come and hard to lose. She gave Mercer his coffee the same way she gave the horse her silence, without asking and without comment. He came in off the dark chores stiff and closed the way he had been for 4 years, and there was the cup at his place, hot, and he took it without thanks because the thanks would have made a thing of it. And the 2 of them got past the small words inside the first month the way people do who have decided, without saying it, to be easy with each other. It was a Sunday. She told him about her father, though he had not asked. The 2 of them at the rail in the long evening light with the bay dozing easy behind them. She did not look at him while she said it. She looked at the horse. "He died gentling a horse," she said, "not thrown. His heart, in the pen, on a quiet morning, doing the thing he loved, and I found him sitting against the rail with the colt standing over him not spooked at all, because even dying he had not frightened it." She was quiet a moment. "I was 19. After that, the outfits would not hire a girl to do the work, so I cooked, because a woman can always cook, and I carried his way of going at a horse around in me for 20 years with nowhere to put it down." She ran her hand along the top rail. "This is the first pen anybody has let me back into since. I did not come here for the cooking, Mr. Mercer, though I will cook you the best you have ever eat. I came up that road because the letter said there was a horse nobody could touch, and I have been looking my whole life for a horse nobody could touch." Mercer did not fill the quiet with comfort. He let it sit, the way she let a horse's fear sit until it settled on its own. Then he said he would be proud of the work you did on the bay. "I do not know about proud," she said. "He did not hold with proud, but he would have sat on the bucket beside me, and that is the same thing from him." And she stopped, having said more than she had said to any person in years, and the bay came up behind them and put his head between them over the rail, and she laughed low and pushed his nose off, and the moment closed gently, the way she closed everything without making it carry more than it could hold. It was a Thursday the bay first crossed the pen to her. She was on the bucket with her back half turned, mending a saddle blanket, humming, and she heard him come, the slow, careful fall of the big feet in the dust, and she did not turn and did not stiffen and did not stop her humming, and she felt his breath at the back of her neck, warm and grass-smelling, and still she did not turn, and the horse stood over her a long moment, smelling her hat and her shoulder and the wool in her lap, and then he blew out, hard, a great release of a breath he had been holding for 3 years, and dropped his head and stood. And Ruth Ackley, very slow, not turning, lifted one hand and laid it flat and easy on the bay's jaw, and the horse led her, and that was all, and it was everything. The foreman saw it from the smokehouse corner. He did not call out, and he did not come closer. He took his hat off, which a man does without thinking when he's in the presence of a thing bigger than he expected, and he stood there bareheaded a while, and then he went off and did not say much to anybody for the rest of that day, and the hands asked each other what had got into him, and nobody knew, and Ruth Ackley did not tell them because some things are made smaller by the telling, and she had learned which ones. After that, the work went quick the way it does once the hard turn is made. Within the week, she had a hand on his neck and then an arm over his back, leaning her weight slow across him in the pen so he learned the feel of it, and the bay carried it, trembling at first and then not, and she talked to him the whole time, low, a steady stream of nothing in particular, the price of flour and the state of the weather and an old song with the words half gone, because the words did not matter, only the staying did. She did not get up on him. She was in no hurry to get up on him. The getting up, she said, when Mercer asked, is the easy part and the last part, and a man who rushes to it undoes a month of mornings. The hands had come around to her by then, all but Dewey, who nursed his grudge in the way of the young, and one evening at the table the talk turned to her in front of her, the way it does when people have decided to be proud of a person. "You ought to charge the boss for it," said an old hand named Esau, the oldest there, his face like a dried apple. 3 years that horse has et his hay and thrown his men and earned him nothing but doctor bills. You have made him a using horse in a month of mornings. "I have not made him anything," said Ruth. "He made himself. I only sat where he could see I meant him no harm." And she ladled out the stew and would not take the credit, and Mercer, at the head of the table where he rarely sat with the men, looked down the boards at her and said, the first soft thing the hands had ever heard out of him, "She is too modest." I have watched it every morning for a month. It is the finest piece of horsework I have seen in my life, and I have seen some. And Ruth, who could take an insult without a flinch, went red to the ears at the praise and turned to the stove so they would not see it. And the table laughed. Warm this time, and Dewey did not laugh and went out. And that was a thing nobody marked at the time and should have. The trouble, when it came up the road in a good buggy, the way trouble does in that country. A man named Harmon Slate drove out from the county seat in a bright, hard afternoon, a heavy, florid man in a town coat who bought and sold horseflesh and had heard, the way such men hear things, that the killer bay at the bench had been gentled at last and was worth real money now to a man who knew where to sell a blood horse with a quiet mouth. He did not get down from the buggy. He had a paper in his hand. "Mercer," Slate said, "you owe Tilden's bank on this place, and Tilden sold your note to me in the spring, and I am calling it." He let that sit in the dust. Or, he looked over at the far pen where the bay stood easy. "Or you sign me that blood bay, clear today, and the note goes back in the drawer, and we forget the whole thing. He is worth more to me than your debt, and we both know it. That is a generous offer to a man in your position." The hands had drifted up by then, the way hands do when a buggy comes, and Ruth among them, wiping her hands on her apron, and the bay at the far rail lifted his head and laid his ears at the stranger's voice and showed the white of his eye, 3 years of fear coming up in him at once, and he began to fret along the rails. Cole Mercer looked at the horse and at the woman who had gentled him, and at the paper in the heavy man's hand, and he was quiet a long moment, the way he was quiet about most things, and then he said, "No, you will lose the place," Slate said. "I have lost things before," said Mercer. He did not raise his voice. "That horse is not for sale to you, not for the note, not for twice the note. He has been afraid every day of his life until a month ago, and I will not hand him to a man who will sell him on to the next pole and shoot and rope before the month is out. I will find your money another way. Now, turn your buggy around. You're scaring him." It was a long speech for Mercer, the longest the hands had heard, and Slate's florid face went a shade darker, and he gathered his lines. "You are a fool," he said, "a sentimental fool over a horse. The note is due in 30 days, and I will have this place or your money, and I do not much care which." "You will have the money?" said Mercer. "How?" said Slate, sneering. "With what?" And it was Ruth Ackley who answered him, stepping up beside Mercer with her hands still in her apron. "He has got something to sell you do not know about," she said, level, looking the heavy man in the eye without a flicker. "He has got a cook who can gentle anything you bring her, and there's not an outfit in this county that does not have a spoiled horse eating its hay and earning nothing. You drove out here thinking you found a desperate man. What you found is a man with the one thing every ranch within 50 miles will pay good money for." She let that sit the way he had let his threat sit. "Drive on home, Mr. Slate. We will have your money inside the month, and you will have missed your chance at the only blood bay in the territory with a soft mouth and a long memory for who was kind to him." Slate looked at her, the big plain woman in the apron, and he did not have an answer ready for that. Having come prepared for a beaten man and found a partnership instead, and he turned his buggy hard and drove out with the dust coming up gold behind him and hanging and settling slow on the road. The pen went quiet. The bay settled at the rail, and Cole Mercer turned and looked at his cook in front of all his hands and said, "You would do that. Gentle horses for hire, to save my place." "I would do that," she said. "The place is worth saving. So is the horse. They did it. The word went out the way word does, and within the week there was a spoiled mare trailered in from the Dolan outfit and a man-killer gelding from the bench's nearest neighbor, and Ruth Ackley sat in the pen with each of them in turn, with her mending in her lap and her back half turned and her low stream of nothing, and one by one they came across the dust to her. Old Dolan himself drove the mare over, a hard, flinty cattleman of about 60, who had no use for what he called foolishness, and he stood at the rails with Mercer and watched the big woman settle onto her bucket in the pen with the squealing, striking mare not 30 feet off, and he spat in the dust and said, low, so she would not hear, or so he thought, "You're paying good money to watch a woman knit at a horse." And Ruth, who heard everything, did not turn her head, only said, mild, to the air, "Knitting, mending. And the mare will come to me before that mare comes to any rope you own, Mr. Dolan, and you may put $1 on it if you have got one that is lonesome." And the old man's mouth twitched in spite of himself, and he leaned on the rail to wait. It took the better part of the day. She did not hurry it for the audience. She sat and mended and hummed and let the mare scream itself out and circle and strike at nothing, and finally, in the long heat of the afternoon, stand trembling and blowing at the far rail with no fight left to make and nobody offering her one. And then, in her own time, take one step toward the still humming woman, and another, until at the gold end of the day the mare stood over Ruth Ackley smelling her hat, and Ruth lifted one slow hand and laid it on the trembling neck, and old Dolan took his hat off at the rail without seeming to know he had done it, the way Mercer had a month before, and he said to Mercer, "Quiet. I have handled horses 60 years, and I've never seen the like of it, and I will tell every outfit between here and the river," and that was the chorus turning. An old hard man humbled at a rail, and once a thing like that turns, it stays turned. The money came in after that, dollar by dollar, more of it than the break-in ever earned, and inside the 30 days Mercer rode to the county seat and laid Harmon Slate's money on the bank counter in front of the town, and got his note marked paid and the deed back clear, and he did not say a word about the cost, and he rode home. Her bucket is not the only thing that moved that summer. Mercer's chair moved too. At the long table in the cookhouse, from the far head where the boss sits, apart down to the near corner by the stove where the food came off the fire, and nobody remarked on it, and the hands made room, and by the gold end of the season the boss of the bench took his supper at the elbow of the cook, the way a married man does, and it was a while before either of them seemed to notice it had happened, the way the truest things arrive, sideways and already settled. There had been an evening a week before he asked her that he carried with him up to the asking. The two of them had stayed late at the cookhouse table after the hands had gone to their bunks, him oiling a bridle and her with her endless mending, the lamp the only light, and neither had said a word for the better part of an hour, and it had not been an empty hour. It had been the fullest he had spent in 4 years. The small sounds of her needle and his rag in the stove ticking down, and at the end of it she had risen and laid her broad hand for one moment on his shoulder as she passed, the way she laid a hand on a horse that had done well, and gone off to her room behind the kitchen, and he had sat there a long while after with the bridle forgotten in his hands. That was the night he had started working up to it. He said it to her on a warm evening at the end of the season, out at the pen, the Blood Bay dozing easy at the rail behind them, and the cottonwoods at the creek going gold at the tips, and the long light coming violet over the mesa. He did not make a speech of it. He had watched her teach him for a whole summer that you do not rush the last part, and he had learned the lesson. "Ruth," he said, "I have got a question I have been working up to the way you work up to a horse." "Then do not rush it," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved, which from her was a great deal. "I am not a young man, and I'm not a smooth one," he said. "I buried a wife 4 years back, and I've been no use to anybody since, until a woman sat down in a pen and showed me how a thing comes back to life when you stop trying to force it." He turned his hat once in his hands. "I am asking you to stay on. Not as the cook, as my wife. I've got a place that is yours as much as mine now, and a horse that likes you better than he likes me, and a table that has had your chair at the near corner of it since June, whether either of us said so." He set the offer down plain. "Marry me, Ruth Ackley. I'm not asking you to be anything but what you are. That is the whole of what I want." She was quiet a while, the way she was quiet with a horse, letting the moment be what it was, and the bay shifted behind them and blew out, and she put her hand flat on the top rail and looked out at the violet light coming over the mesa. "I told a boy at that table in the spring that no man would have me," she said. "I believed it when I said it. I have believed it most of my life, and I built a whole self out of not minding it." She turned and looked at him. "You are asking me to take that self apart. I'm asking you to let it be wrong," he said. She looked at him a long moment. the plain, weathered, honest face of him, and she did the thing she had not let herself do in front of any person in 20 years, which was to let her face show what was in it. "You should know what you're getting," she said low. "I'm not a young woman, and I'm not a small one, and I do not come prettier and better light. I have got my father's hands and a back that has carried other people's kitchens for 20 years, and a habit of expecting nothing, which is a hard habit to keep house with. I have watched you a whole summer," he said. "I'm not asking about any of that. I'm asking about the woman who sat in the dust until a killer laid his head on her shoulder. That is who I am asking. The rest of it I can see fine in any light there is." She was a long time answering because the answer was so large it had to be got out carefully or not at all, the way she got everything out, and at the end of it she said, "Yes, I will." And the corner of her mouth moved, all the way this time, and she let it, and he reached over and took one of her broad, work-hardened hands in his scarred one, the way she took a horse's trust, slow and asking nothing, and she let him have it. And behind them the bay came across the dust and stood over the both of them as if to say the thing was settled and witnessed. They were married at the little church at the county seat in the gold of September, and the hands came in their good shirts, and old Esau gave her away because there was no one else to do it, and he counted it the honor of his life, and Dewey came too, having grown up some over the summer the way the bay had gentled, and he shook Mercer's hand and could not look at Ruth and mumbled a thing that was as close to sorry as 19 can get, and Ruth said, plain and not unkind, "I know it. Go on and dance," and he did. Old Dolan came as well, uninvited, and stood at the back with his hat in his hands, and told anyone who would listen that he had been the second man in the county to take his hat off to her, and would not be the last. The cottonwoods went gold and then bare, and the warm, dry days ran on long, and the gentling work went on, more of it than she could take in a season, so that by spring there was talk of a second pen and a girl or two come up from the southern outfits to learn the way of it from her, the slow way, the only way, the staying. The far pen, where the Blood Bay had stood alone for 3 years, became the place the whole county sent its broken horses, and the woman the outfit had taken for nothing but a cook became the thing they drove 50 miles to find. On an evening at the end of it, Ruth Mercer walked out to the far pen the way she still did every morning and every dusk, and the Blood Bay came across the dust to her without being asked, the way he did now, and laid his big jaw over her shoulder, and Cole came up from the barn and stood beside her at the rail with his arm along her broad back, and she leaned into him, which she had learned to do over the long warm months, the way the horse had learned to cross the pen, slow, and as if it might be taken from her if she did it too fast, except that it was not taken, and she did it again, and it stayed. The lamp burned warm in the cookhouse window behind them, and the smoke went up straight from the chimney into the still violet air, and a horse shifted somewhere in the dark of the pens, and the three of them stood there in the last light, the woman and the man and the horse that no one could break, and nobody said anything, because the staying was the whole of it and always had been. And that was the story of Ruth Ackley, a woman the whole outfit took for nothing but a cook, who sat down in the dust and waited and gentled a killer horse and a grieving man with the same patient hands, and asked for nothing the entire time but a quiet pen in the morning. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one and where you're watching from tonight.